Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation. My name is Arno Mokros and I'm a program associate at Fractured Atlas. I wanted to say first that I really appreciate new and prospective members taking the time out of their busy schedules to learn about our programs and services. I find in my own experience that members who proactively learn about our fiscal sponsorship policies and procedures have a much easier time using our program to raise money. And first, I also want to I hope that everyone can hear me okay. If at any time my voice cuts out, please chat me using the Zoom chat functionality. And in fact, if someone wouldn't mind just chatting me confirmation that you all can hear the sound of my voice. Excellent, thanks so much. So throughout tonight's presentation, we're going to be talking about going through an introduction to fiscal sponsorship, both giving an overview of Fractured Atlas's program, but also talking about fiscal sponsorship more generally. And it really is, sort of a beginner guide. So if you're looking for something that's more tailored to applying for grants and might be more advanced, I would definitely recommend checking out some of our other webinars for those kinds of resources. And during the webinar, there'll be opportunities to ask questions. Feel free to throw out any question as we go along. If it's relevant, I'll stop and answer the question as it comes up. Otherwise, you can save your questions for the end and we'll have a Q&A period. Tonight's webinar is also being recorded, so don't feel the need to take copious amounts of notes. I'll email you all a link to the recording later this week. And you're welcome to share it with any of your friends who might be interested or collaborators who might benefit from the information that we're going to talk about. And without further ado, let's get started. So now let's start with why you're here. Likely you've got a great idea to create art, like maybe you're a filmmaker working on a passion project. Or you're a choreographer trying to start a new dance company. Perhaps you're a visual artist looking to create a new installation. Or you're an educator who wants to start training the next generation of artists. Either you're trying to create an artistic product or provide an artistic service, but you're not sure how you can pay for it. Arts projects are typically funded three ways. One, you can pay for your artistic expenses yourself. If you had the resources to fund all of your art entirely out of pocket, you probably wouldn't be here. Probably this doesn't describe most artists in the United States, and you might feel pretty jealous of other folks who have that situation. Another opportunity is to get other people to pay for your artwork, perhaps by selling your products or services to them, or by having them invest in your project and offering them a share of the profit in exchange. Unless you're a Hollywood film producer or a Broadway director, it's unlikely that you're able to finance your project through sales or for-profit investment alone, however. So you might seek charitable nonprofit sources of support by soliciting donations from individuals, sponsorship from businesses, or grants from foundations. This model differs from the for-profit scenario in that individuals, businesses, or foundations are supporting your work out of the kindness of their hearts because they believe in you, your project, or in the impact that you're trying to make in your community or for your audience. The large majority of these types of donations in the United States are made to nonprofit entities that have been granted 501c3 status by the IRS. Now, without 501c status, you could ask for donations from individuals or grants from foundations, without that status. And it's likely that your closest family members might make a small contribution. Or there are certainly some foundations that award grants to individual artists without 501c3 status. But if you've done any fundraising before, you likely know that being able to offer individuals tax deductibility in exchange for their contribution can be a major incentive in getting donors to open up their wallets. And while there are institutions that award grants and fellowships to individuals or art collectives, you'll find that many more corporations and foundations will only support organizations that have 501c3 status. And even if you do a little research into the process, you can find that it can be expensive and a time-consuming process. And expensive in that you'll probably want to consult with an attorney to file the appropriate paperwork with your state and with the IRS to become a 501c3, and time-consuming in that it can sometimes take a long time from the moment you decide to form an arts organization to the moment where the IRS finally declares that you are considered a 501c3 organization. Not to mention the fact that forming a 501c3 is not the right fit for everybody. For instance, let's say you're just an individual photographer who's trying to fundraise to support your next exhibition. Or you're not 100% sure that you've got a viable idea, like you're a new theater company that wants to see if there's a demand in your community for your projects before committing to forming a nonprofit organization. Or your project isn't exclusively a charitable enterprise. Maybe you're a filmmaker who plans to shop around your project to commercial distributors, but also you want to get donations to start production on your movie. Fractured Atlas in our fiscal sponsorship program is here to help. And before we go deeper into fiscal sponsorship, I'd like to say that it's really lovely to meet all of you tonight, even if we're in this digital setting. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Arno. I'm a program associate here at Fractured Atlas. I do also have a fiscally sponsored project with Fractured Atlas that is a self-published literary magazine. So I can empathize with a lot of the fundraising concerns a lot of you probably have in mind, and I can speak from that experience as well. And here at Fractured Atlas, I work with the rest of our programs team of artists and arts administrators who serve our more than 75,000 members internationally. And this includes more than 4,000 fiscally sponsored projects, artists, and arts organizations. Since 2002, we've helped artists raise over $162 million, $24 million of which was in the last 12 months alone. So to tell you more about Fractured Atlas, if you don't know us already, we're a nonprofit company that supports artists and arts organizations. To that end, we use technology and create online solutions that help meet artists' business needs so they can spend more time focusing on what's important, creating their art. We have a number of programs and services, but again, our conversation tonight will be focused on fundraising and specifically the tool of fiscal sponsorship. Our fiscal sponsorship program eliminates an important hurdle to fundraising, forming a 501c3 organization, as we just talked about the various aspects of how that can be an onerous process. With fiscal sponsorship, we actually extend some of the benefits of Fractured Atlas's 501c3 status so that artists and arts organizations can solicit tax-deductible donations from individuals, corporate sponsorship, and grants from foundations, and access some other benefits which would typically only otherwise be available to nonprofits. So fiscal sponsorship is probably great if you're an individual artist seeking financial support for your arts practice, a new or small arts organization that wants a training wheels period before deciding if you want to pursue your own nonprofit status, or a for-profit arts enterprise that wants to seek both investors who plan to share in the profits of your work and nonprofit donors who want to make a tax-deductible donation. The mechanism of fiscal sponsorship is that a donor or institution makes their contribution directly to the 501c3 organization. So in our case, a donor who wanted to support your work would make a credit card donation on our website or write a check out to Fractured Atlas. We then issue the donor a tax receipt and hold the donation in a fund restricted for your project's use. You then request the funds from us, and we disperse them to you in the form of a grant. Now, I may be biased, but I happen to think that our fiscal sponsorship program is the best in the arts nonprofit sector. That said, we still want to encourage you to shop around for fiscal sponsors to find an organization that will be the best fit for you and your work. There are a few things that you should be aware of as you shop around. The first is that every fiscal sponsor is going to charge an administrative fee on donations that they process for the purposes of your work. Our fee is 7%. Most sponsors are going to charge somewhere between 5 and 10%. Our fee covers all costs associated with administrating your sponsored fund, including staff time, maintaining our website, bank fees, credit card processing fees, etc. And our fee structure is actually tiered, so the more money you raise, the lower the fee goes on check and wire transfer donations from individuals and grantors. And we found that our 7% administrative fee actually represents a discount compared to the cost of maintaining a new or small arts nonprofit. Unless you already have a dedicated accounting staff in place or automated systems to help you keep track of your income and expenditures, the cost of maintaining your 501c3 status with the IRS can eat up more than 7% of your contributed revenue. Another thing to keep in mind when evaluating potential fiscal sponsors is that all of them are going to maintain some level of oversight with regard to how you solicit donations and how donated funds are used. You'll also want to be clear with your sponsor regarding ownership of the work that you produce while sponsored. With Fractured Atlas, you maintain ownership over the work, but if you decide to enter a for-profit agreement, like with outside investors or commercial distributors, we want to be kept in the loop and review these arrangements. So now that we've talked about what you should consider when choosing a fiscal sponsor, I'll tell you more about the features and procedures of our program. So when it comes to our oversight of your fundraising activities, we want to review and sign off on your written donor solicitation materials. This includes things like letters of individual appeal to donors, newsletters, e-blasts, and website content. Anything that mentions Fractured Atlas or promises tax deductibility to your donors is something we would want to review. We also would want to review your crowdfunding campaigns. Luckily, we offer a crowdfunding platform, Fundraising by Fractured Atlas, as part of our fiscal sponsorship. Staff will assist you in setting up your campaign and review it to ensure you have properly accounted for any goods you're offering in exchange for your donations. There are no additional fees for using our crowdfunding tools. The same 7% administrative fee applies to donations received through this platform. Fiscal sponsorship with Fractured Atlas can also open the door to institutional funding, like from foundations or corporations. As with approvals of your individual solicitations and crowdfunding campaigns, we want to be involved when you apply for grants from these sources. Before you start looking at grants, you should be aware that we have an internal grant eligibility requirement. We require that projects raise $1,000 before they are eligible to apply for grants through us. If you can show that you've raised $1,000 through contributed, not earned income, we may be able to waive that requirement. And if you're in a situation like that, feel free to reach out to us by email at support@fracturedatlas.org. We have this requirement in place because we've actually received feedback from funders that they want to see a demonstrated track record of previous fundraising with individual donors and support from your community before you're seeking institutional funding. If you want to know more about grants, you can learn more about the grant review process that we have in our knowledge base and through watching our grants webinar. So once you've received donations or grants, you'll probably want your money. You can submit a fund release request through our website to release funds directly to your bank account to cover project expenses. It's a simple online form on our website, and you'll use a drop-down menu of choices to tell us what you need the funds for and how much you need. As part of our oversight as a fiscal sponsor, we do require documentation of all fund releases of $5,000 or more, because that's a significant amount of money. And we do also reserve the right to request documentation of expenses at any time. This is because it's our responsibility to ensure that funds donated to Fractured Atlas are only used for project activities that have been approved and are charitable in nature. We do work to make this process as seamless as possible, so you'll be able to upload any documentation you need to provide when you submit your request through the online form. As the other key component of our oversight, we'll require that you submit an annual report if you've received donations or released funds for expenses within the past year. The annual report is an online form and asks a few narrative questions and for some brief and general financial reporting for that year. The annual report is due on April 1st of each year, and we'll send you regular reminders regarding making sure that you get that filled out starting in January each year. It's important to know that the annual report is not in any way related to tax filing or reporting. You need to know that any funds released to cover project expenses are considered taxable grant income by the IRS. If you are an individual or an LLC and you've released $600 or more in a given tax year, we'll send you a 1099 MISC form for that income. I also want to be sure that everyone knows that Fractured Atlas staff are not accountants or tax professionals. So we would strongly encourage you to work with a professional to file your taxes and address any tax-related questions you may have. It's also important to keep in mind that fiscal sponsorship is a contractual relationship between yourself and your fiscal sponsor. Fractured Atlas has a non-exclusive relationship with our projects. This means that we don't restrict our projects to only being fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas. So if you need to have another fiscal sponsor, that's fine with us. An example where you might actually need another fiscal sponsor is if you're applying for a grant in California that requires that the funds be awarded to a California-based 501c3 organization. Since Fractured Atlas is based in New York, even though we work nationally, that might be a situation in which the funder requires a local fiscal sponsor. If you do need to reach out to another fiscal sponsor, just be sure that their program is also not exclusive. You are welcome to take a look at our fiscal sponsorship agreement through our website, and that agreement covers a lot of the policies and procedures we've discussed tonight. But since it's a legal document, it's always a good idea to read through it before you go ahead and sign it. This is also where you'll find the online application for fiscal sponsorship. So let's go through the steps to getting fiscal sponsorship with Fractured Atlas. Your first step, if you haven't already become a member of Fractured Atlas, you'll want to become a member at one of our dues-paying levels of membership. Fiscal sponsorship is available to either professional or organization levels members. Professional and organization level offer the same benefits. Organization level allows you to have multiple users. So if you have collaborators on your project who need to be involved in managing your fiscal sponsorship, then the organization level might be a good fit. If your project is really your own work as an individual, or you're the only administrator for your project, then the professional level probably works well for you. So when we're actually reviewing an application for fiscal sponsorship, we're looking for two essential things. We want to see that your work is artistic in nature, because we are an arts organization and our mission is focused on the arts. And we want to see that you're offering some benefit to the public, so that you're not creating paintings to put them in a warehouse so that no one will ever see them. Rather, if you're making a film, we want to make sure that people are actually going to have the opportunity to see the film. So any interaction that you describe that the public will have the opportunity to see the work is what we're looking for in this place. There are some other application questions, including a rudimentary budget. This budget section is really for your own planning purposes, and it gives us a general sense of your expenses and potential fundraising prospects. But we totally understand that probably your budget will change over time, and so we won't evaluate this in terms of deciding whether or not you'll become fiscally sponsored. We're also going to just ask for you to let us know if you have or are expecting any outside for-profit investors in your project. There are a few other questions in the application, and we just encourage you to fill it out as best you can. We also want to be sure that you know that Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship application is not currently screen reader compatible. We are hard at work improving the application's accessibility, but in the meantime, if you use a screen reader and are having a hard time accessing the application, please do not hesitate to contact us at either support@fracturedatlas.org or 888-692-7878, and we will work with you to ensure that you can apply. Once your application is submitted, it will be reviewed by our board of directors. You'll receive a response from us within 1 to 2 weeks of applying for fiscal sponsorship. And before we open up for questions in just a moment, I just want to quickly plug some of our other programs and services that we offer to our artist members. The first is Artfully. Artfully is an online system to manage your tickets, donations, and contacts. It's a simple, elegant way to keep track of events, people, and your everyday work. You can sell tickets on your site or through an Artfully storefront, sync MailChimp lists and contacts, provide ticket buyers and donors with automatic email receipts, among other things to manage tickets and patrons. Artfully is also compatible with our fiscal sponsorship program, so you can track your donors and other fans in the same place. It's a great way to start understanding your audience and managing your segments. Our next program is Space Finder. For artists, I'm sure you all know, the process of finding workspace can be really frustrating and inefficient. Meanwhile, venues themselves have limited resources to spend finding new renters. So earned revenue is critical for creative venues, yet many rental spaces are actually tragically underutilized. Through the Space Finder program, Fractured Atlas is increasing visibility of rental options, helping artists find the space they need and helping venues promote and rent their spaces. There are over 5,000 spaces listed on Space Finder and about 500,000 searches for space every year. There are also $800,000 or more annual rental referrals to participate in creative venues. We also have an insurance program here at Fractured Atlas. Thanks to the combined purchasing power of the Fractured Atlas community, our membership, our members have access to high quality coverage for much lower rates than it would otherwise be possible. Our insurance program is administered by our brokers at Locked In Affinity, and you can apply for a quote at fracturedatlasinsurance.org. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to the presentation. I want to open up now the opportunity for anyone attending to throw out any questions they may have. And you can feel free to use either the chat or Q&A feature. Sure. So someone put out a question. They said, are there any limitations to how money is received? In the past, Facebook fundraising has been a huge component to how we've raised funds. And this is actually a great question. There are many different online fundraising tools out there, and in many cases, they might not be compatible with our fiscal sponsorship program. Facebook is actually a really good example. Unfortunately, Facebook fundraising is designed for organizations with their own 501c3 status, so it's not currently compatible with fiscal sponsorship. We do have a blog post that I can actually send to this person or to anyone who's interested regarding other possible ways to fundraise using Facebook, but their actual fundraising mechanism, unfortunately, is not compatible. If you, at any point while you're fiscally sponsored, you're interested in using a particular fundraising tool, I would say reach out to Fractured Atlas staff at support@fracturedatlas.org to check in about the opportunity to see if it's really compatible. For the most part, because we're devoted to developing our own online tools, we'll encourage you to focus your energy on fundraising online using either your general support page on our website or using a crowdfunding campaign. But there are various different mechanisms, so we're definitely open to any questions and looking into opportunities. Someone also asked, is there anything else you like to have in an application? And I think this brings up our program is actually totally non-curatorial. So we're not looking at work samples or anything like that. Rather, you're providing a description of what your project is and how it's artistic in nature. And we're not going to evaluate the quality of your art or what the art is. We just want to see that it's artistic and that people have an opportunity to interact with it. Someone else asked, do you sponsor projects all around the United States? Yes, we're a national organization. The only real requirement to become fiscally sponsored is to have a legal entity that's based in the United States, meaning that it has a US tax ID number. And so oftentimes that would be individual sole proprietors with their own social security number, and then also other business entities like LLCs and corporations. We do have some artists who are working on projects abroad, but again, they have to report taxes in the United States in order to be fiscally sponsored. Do you review expenditures to be sure they are for the project purposes? To a certain extent, yes, we do review expenditures. So when you submit a fund release request online in the submission form, you'll actually provide us a list of all the expense categories that the expenditures fall within. And if, for instance, something seemed to fall outside of the realm of the project, we didn't just follow up to ask questions because that's our due diligence as your fiscal sponsor. We do try to make this process as streamlined as possible. And if there were any questions that you ever have about what an appropriate project expense was, I would encourage you to reach out to Fractured Atlas staff. Did I find it difficult to raise my first $1,000? So I can speak from my own experience. I raised $1,000 through a crowdfunding campaign. And crowdfunding is a particular mechanism that mostly relies on people that fairly well, your as we say, your nearest and dearest. And so those were people who are really quite willing to support my work. Other folks, it's perhaps it might take a bit longer. It really depends on the unique situation. But I think that crowdfunding is a really good tool to sort of jumpstart at that point. Someone has a very specific question. Which model of fiscal sponsorship do you use? And they said, are you Model C? We are, in fact, a Model C fiscal sponsor. There are different types of fiscal sponsorship models out there. What I've described tonight is what's referred to as a pre-approved grantor relationship. So that's the situation where we were talking about where folks make a donation to Fractured Atlas to support your work, and then we grant the funds to the sponsored project. So that's when the grantor-grantee relationship comes up. There are other models and different fiscal sponsorships out there that are other models. And so you can learn more about that through other resources. Can you elaborate more on the initial $1,000 fundraising requirement? Do grants we've already received without fiscal sponsorship count towards that requirement? Potentially. So what we require is that projects have raised $1,000 from individuals or other sources before they apply for grants. That does not mean that you have to raise $1,000 before applying for fiscal sponsorship, but it means that you have to have that fundraising record before you apply for grants. If you've already raised $1,000 outside of fiscal sponsorship, you can provide some kind of proof to us, by email. A check image would be fine, a list of donors with their names, the amount they donated, and the date. The most important thing to keep in mind is we'll want to see that those funds were received within the past 2 years, and that the funds were received specifically to support the project that you're working on now. So if it had been a grant or fundraising for a previous project, that wouldn't count towards a track record for this particular project. So someone pointed out, can you elaborate on the requirements needed to apply for grants if accepted? So depending on the type of grant opportunity, there will be various materials requested by the funder, either from Fractured Atlas or from you as the project, and we'll ask to review all the documents that you're required to submit as part of that application. And in our own internal review process, we ask for 10 business days to provide feedback and to give us enough time to actually pull together all the documents that will be needed from Fractured Atlas. There's a lot more information about the grant review process in our knowledge base and also in our grants webinar, if that's of interest. Someone asked if there is a template or a guideline on our site for how to craft my first letter. And they also mentioned that Fractured Atlas is their fiscal sponsor already. Congratulations. Yes, we actually do provide a template for a first individual appeal letter. And so once you become approved for fiscal sponsorship, you would have access to that template through the My Fiscal Sponsorship page. If you would like some more information about accessing this, please do feel free to reach out to us and we can direct you to where exactly that lives. Another question about, do you allow for profit investors? So I think something important to keep in mind is that Fractured Atlas is only ever processing contributed revenue for your sponsored project. So any credit card donations or checks that Fractured Atlas is receiving to support your work are all donations. So that would not be for-profit income from investors. So if you want to have investors, that is definitely possible. But any of that investment income would actually come to you directly and would not pass through fiscal sponsorship. There are some other considerations to keep in mind with regard to for-profit investment. And if you have questions about that, I would encourage you to reach out to us by email. Again, it's support@fracturedatlas.org. Someone else has a question about reporting in-kind donations, such as food for a gallery event or materials for a specific project. We are able to process non-cash donations through Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship program. It's important to keep in mind that we can only process donations of property because the IRS does not consider donations of services to be tax deductible. So food would be an instance of something that would be considered a tangible real-world item that can be donated. For these types of donations, there's actually a letter that you'll be able to download once you're fiscally sponsored to provide to the donor, where they'll describe what the item is that they're donating and give an estimated value of that item. If the donation is valued at $250 or more, we ask for some documentation in form of a photo of whatever is being donated. So if someone's donating food for your event, just be sure you snap a photo before everyone goes to town actually eating it. There are some particular things to keep in mind also with non-cash donations and how they're processed, because the value of the donated item is still considered taxable. So I would strongly encourage you to check out our knowledge base for some really specific information about that. I will actually be sending you a link to the recording of the video later this week. Someone asked about where it will be available. So you'll have access as soon as I have a chance to send it to you. There's another question about, do you only disperse funds to the individual, or can you pay project expenses directly to the vendor? So as part of our program, we grant funds to our projects to then use for expenses. Fractured Atlas is not in any agreements or contracts with your vendors or contractors, so we don't pay any expenses directly. So it's the responsibility of our projects to pay their expenses directly. That's a great question. Is there a donation limit? There is no donation limit, sort of writ large. Something I might note is that the limit on a single credit card transaction through our website is $20,000. It's unlikely that someone's going to donate that amount by credit card. More than likely, they would make a donation by check. Or if they wanted to make a donation by wire transfer, Fractured Atlas can help facilitate that process by email. But other than that, there is no donation limit and no cap in terms of fundraising. I see there are a few more questions in the chat. Someone asked, do many applications get denied? I think the key to this is our program is non-curatorial. And so the only reason why an application would be denied is if we found that it wasn't consistent with our mission, that in some way the project wasn't sufficiently artistic in nature. And I do want to assure you that our definition of art is very expansive, and we don't have a very limited or traditional understanding. But if, for instance, someone applied for a project that was just totally not related to the arts, that would be a reason why an application would be denied. And again, the project does need to offer some benefit to the public because we're accepting charitable donations for the project. Another question, you mentioned that I raise $1,000 through contributed income rather than earned income before I can apply for grants. Earned income, and what's the difference between the two? Contributed income is everything that we're talking about tonight in terms of receiving donations to support your work. So that's when someone is making a donation just out of the kindness in their heart, that is a gift to be used for your project. Earned income is when someone pays you for a product or service, and that's something that's not processed through fiscal sponsorship. That kind of income, so of course, you can continue to accept it, but you'll receive it directly from anyone that you're working with or selling products to. Who sits on the board to judge funding on an artist? So Fractured Atlas has its own board of directors that oversees our work as a nonprofit organization, and they sign off on approving our fiscal sponsorship applications. It's not a review panel in a traditional sense with regard to funding, so it's not an extensive process. As I mentioned, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks. If you'd like to look at the list of the board of directors, you're certainly welcome to do so. You can find that under the About Us tab on our website. Someone had a question, do you support us if we get audited? This would be a rather unique situation, and I think this is regarding auditing from the IRS. I would, definitely encourage you to get in touch about this particular question and the kinds of support you might be looking for. Because we do request documentation throughout the fund release process for any funds that are released to the project. It's possible we might have some records from previous fund releases that we can provide to help in the audit process. But I think I would need to know a bit more about the unique situation to know how we might be able to be helpful. But more than likely, for something like that, I would say an accountant or a tax advisor is going to be the most helpful. Someone has a question about insurance and what gets covered under insurance. There are actually many different types of insurance policies that our program offers. So depending on what your needs are, there would be a different policy that you would want to pursue. If you have questions regarding the types of coverage you need for specific things like copyright or trademark law, I would encourage you to reach out to our brokers at Lockton Affinity, and you can find their contact information on our website. Do you have sample budgets and projects on your website? So we do have, you can look through all of our fiscally sponsored projects under the programs and services, meet our sponsored projects. So you can browse through profile pages for each and every project that's currently fiscally sponsored. In terms of sample budgets, I think that this might be referring to the budget that's in the application. For something like this, I would again say that it's mostly for your planning purposes and it's not very extensive. It only has a few expense and funding categories. But we do have a sample budget available for our project's use and reference as they start to put together applications for grant funding. And someone asked, what does the $10 membership get us? So this is the professional level of membership. This grants access to one user on the membership and does allow you to apply for and maintain fiscal sponsorship with Fractured Atlas. If you have multiple people on your team who need to access your membership with Fractured Atlas, need to be in touch with Fractured Atlas staff, or need to be able to log in to report donations or to request funds for release, then probably the organization level membership would make more sense in that case. But beyond just having the ability to have multiple users, the two different membership levels are the same. Someone asked about, can we make donations to our own project? We don't have any restrictions on who can make donations to your project. So you could potentially make a donation to your own project. I would keep in mind, though, that there is a 7% administrative fee that is incurred on all donations. So depending on the situation, it's more than likely going to be more beneficial to pay for expenses directly than to make a donation to Fractured Atlas and then release the funds after the 7% administrative fee has been applied. There also may be some specific ramifications to donating to your own project from a tax perspective. And if you have any questions about that, do feel free to reach out to us because if it's your own project, you are potentially benefiting from the project, it may not be considered a tax deductible donation. So someone mentioned in the Q&A that there is a referral bonus. So once you become fiscally sponsored with Fractured Atlas, once you log in and you're on your My Fiscal Sponsorship page, every project actually has a referral code that they could provide to other artists in their communities, friends of theirs who are interested in fiscal sponsorship. And your colleagues could use that code to sign up for membership with Fractured Atlas. And if they sign up and become approved for fiscal sponsorship and start fundraising, then you can receive a $50 donation from Fractured Atlas in appreciation of your referral. This referral bonus is specific to fiscal sponsorship, so it doesn't refer to referrals to SpaceFinder or to our other programs. I think that, let's see, what happens to the funds after the project has ended? Any balance? So once a project has ended, projects do have the option to release any remaining funds. If the project is ended in our system, we would ask that you get in contact with us within 90 days to be sure we can release the funds for your remaining project expenses. It's important to keep in mind that funds do need to be spent on project-related expenses if they're going to be released. So if for some reason there were no remaining expenses, we can't release the balance without accompanying expenses. There are many different expenses in a situation like that. For instance, you might be paying your collaborators for their time spent on their projects. Any final administrative expenses might be appropriate for your project. It depends on the situation, but of course you always have the opportunity to request those funds. These have all been great questions. Does anyone have any final questions or anything that needs further clarification? So someone threw out a question regarding working on multiple projects. And this is a really good thing to provide clarification about. So for any membership with Fractured Atlas, only one fiscal sponsorship can be associated with that membership. So when you're applying for fiscal sponsorship, we would encourage you to submit your application for your artistic activities in as broadly defined as possible. For instance, you might be a theater company and you're starting out by doing, let's say, a production of Hamlet. Rather than applying for your production of Hamlet, you might consider applying for your ongoing work as a theater company so you can fundraise for that production and then subsequent productions. I think the question posed also asks about how to incorporate multiple projects that might be actually very distinct. And if you have questions about how your projects fit into a sort of a larger project umbrella, I would encourage you to reach out to us. The situation I described about a theater company is a very straightforward one, but there may be other situations where one overarching organization name doesn't encompass all of your work as an artist. So I would definitely reach out to us for more feedback if you have questions about that. And then there's a couple other questions. When do you take the 7%, beginning or end of the project? So the 7% administrative fee is actually deducted when the donation is received and processed by Fractured Atlas. So the funds that are actually made available for release already account for the 7% having been deducted. So it's not a fee that you incur directly, but rather it's 7% that is deducted from the donation, and the remaining balance, 93%, is made available for release for project expenses. This is a great question. How long does fiscal sponsorship last? At what point would we need to renew our application? So long as you're, you stay up to date with your membership dues, You submit annual reports and otherwise, remain in good standing with Fractured Atlas, your fiscal sponsorship can remain active for as long as you like. And on the other hand, if for any reason you need to end your fiscal sponsorship, you can choose to end your fiscal sponsorship at any time. There's no real need to renew your application. If, for instance, your fiscal sponsorship ended for some reason, you could also potentially reactivate your fiscal sponsorship. In that case, we would just need you to reach out to us by email so that we can confirm the record of the project activities that we have on file from your original application, and so we can verify that nothing substantial has changed about your activities. Wonderful. Any remaining questions? With that, thank you so much for joining me. I also wanted to give a plug. We do have some other Fractured Atlas webinars. I imagine that many of you are considering applying for fiscal sponsorship at this point. And so I might, encourage you, once you become fiscally sponsored, to register for our orientation webinar. And then as you get started fundraising, many of these other webinars might also be a really good fit at that stage. All right, thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening.